60 tons of steel and fire, engineered to withstand the most devastating German projectiles, now lie buried. Not in a battlefield grave, but in the frozen earth along the Chinese border. Abandoned, left to the slow, gnawing rust under an indifferent sky. This was the IS-4, a tank conceived as the ultimate weapon of victory, yet it never once fired a shot in true combat. A machine destined to crown Soviet tank design, transformed instead into one of the most costly miscalculations in the annals of armored warfare. In the summer of 1943, at the Kirov plant in Chelyabinsk, then known as Tankograd, engineers already understood a stark truth. The formidable IS-2 heavy tank, not yet even deployed to the front lines, was destined to become obsolete far sooner than anyone desired. Across the vast Eastern Front, German forces relentlessly escalated the destructive power of their anti-tank artillery. Their newest tanks and self-propelled guns boasted increasingly long-barreled cannons, launching shells with terrifying muzzle velocities. The threat loomed large, a shadow cast over every existing design. The designers at Tankograd chose to preempt this grim reality. Acting on their own initiative, without awaiting any official military order, they began work on the next generation of heavy armor. Their ambition was palpable, a desperate race against the relentless tide of technological advancement. By November of that same year, the Red Army's main armored directorate officially formalized the requirements for this prospective heavy tank. The new machine would be an engineering marvel, weighing 55 tons, clad in armor ranging from 160 to 200 millimeters thick. It would be powered by an engine generating between 800 and 1,000 horsepower, armed with a main gun of either 122 or 152 millimeters, and crewed by 5 men. These were truly audacious specifications, pushing far beyond the capabilities of any tank then in existence anywhere in the world. On December 10, 1943, the Chelyabinsk designers presented their initial blueprint to Vyacheslav Alexandrovich Malyshev, the People's Commissar for Tank Industry. This preliminary design, designated Project K, made a profound impression. It was compelling enough to secure state funding for its continued development, a crucial endorsement that breathed life into the ambitious endeavor. Project K envisioned an elongated hull, boasting significantly enhanced armor protection, and a completely novel turret of original design. By January of 1944, the project had evolved substantially, earning a new factory designation, Object 701. While the hull largely retained its initial layout, the turret underwent a radical transformation. Engineers meticulously redesigned the frontal section and the gun mantlet, strengthening the roof and removing the machine gun mount from the rear. For its primary armament, they selected the 122 mm S-34 cannon. The heart of this behemoth was to be the V-12 engine, generating 750 horsepower, augmented by a centrifugal turbocharger adapted directly from the powerful AM-38 aircraft engine. Then, on April 8, 1944, Joseph Stalin himself granted personal authorization for the construction of experimental prototypes of Object 701. The first prototype, numbered 0, rolled off the assembly line. A testament to unparalleled engineering, born from the crucible of war. It was a machine built to dominate, yet destined for an ironic, silent end. Its story began not with triumph, but with the quiet hum of an engine that would never truly roar in anger. Within a mere 2 days, and by the close of April, the formidable machine stood fully prepared for its inaugural trial. This pace of work was staggering, defying imagination even by the demanding standards of wartime, a period when Soviet industry routinely achieved what many deemed utterly impossible. It was a testament to sheer will, driven by the relentless, brutal calculus of survival. Soon after, two additional prototypes, designated Number 1 and Number 2, received official approval. Both were constructed at a furious clip, from the heart of May through the end of June, each iteration pushing the boundaries of engineering. The first of these new designs underwent a significant simplification, a strategic move aimed at streamlining future mass production. Non-essential elements, such as turret handrails, were stripped away. Its primary armament became the formidable S-34D2 cannon, complemented by a 50mm S-11 mortar integrated into the turret, a deadly combination designed for both direct fire and infantry support. Prototype number 2, in contrast, was a pure experiment in offensive capability. It received a powerful 100mm S-34 gun, a bold exploration into finding the absolute optimal main armament for the next generation of heavy tanks. This was a critical gamble, balancing destructive power against the practicalities of a combat vehicle. By the end of July, both machines had successfully completed their initial running trials, pushing their engines and transmissions to their limits across common sizing piece for a comprehensive, detailed analysis. Engineers, with grease-stained hands and keen eyes, uncovered significant issues with the transmission and the powerful V12 engine. Yet, despite these glaring flaws, the overall results ignited a spark of optimism. The raw potential of these new designs was undeniable, a beacon of hope in the grim landscape of war. A fourth prototype, partially stripped of its internal components, was constructed with a singular, brutal purpose: ballistic testing. In August, this skeletal hulk was transported to the legendary Kubinka Artillery Proving Ground, a crucible where metal met fire. There, it endured a relentless barrage, targeted by both Soviet and captured German artillery pieces. The thunderous impacts echoed across the range, each shell a stark question about the tank's survivability. The findings confirmed a crucial truth. The new tank possessed significantly superior protection compared to its predecessor, the IS-2, a powerful machine in its own right. However, the tests also revealed an alarming fact. The machine remained vulnerable to the devastating 75mm and 88mm German guns, especially in the critical area of its turret. This was a direct challenge from the enemy's most potent anti-tank weapons, a stark reminder that the design, though improved, was not yet invincible. It meant immediate, drastic modifications were necessary, demanding increased armor thickness in these exposed zones. On August 11th, the People's Commissar of Tank Industry issued a direct, unequivocal order to the Chelyabinsk-Kirov plant. Rework the entire project, integrating the harsh lessons learned from the ballistic trials, and present a new prototype by the end of September. The deadline was impossibly tight, a testament to the urgency of the war. Work on this revised fourth prototype, now formally designated Object 701, began without trandling its armored defenses. The thickness of the frontal hull plates was increased, growing from 120 to a formidable 140 millimeters. The turret, a known weak point, received an even more substantial upgrade, fortified with 200 millimeters of cast armor, a dense, resilient shield designed to deflect the most powerful enemy shells. In a parallel, breathtaking feat of engineering, while the new machine took shape, engineers simultaneously dedicated themselves to retrofitting the original first and second prototypes with the latest components and assemblies. This multi-threaded development was a hallmark of Soviet wartime ingenuity, refusing to let any lesson or resource go to waste. Type number 5. The second, similarly upgraded, became prototype number 6. This system of renumbering might appear confusing to an outsider, but it perfectly reflected the continuous organic evolution of the design. Each subsequent version absorbed the hard-won experience and bitter lessons from previous trials, a relentless, iterative march toward perfection. The fourth prototype, now boasting its radically improved armor scheme, was finally completed in November of 1944. All three machines, the fourth, fifth, and sixth, underwent rigorous running trials during the latter half of that very month, their powerful engines roaring across the proving grounds. Upon the successful completion of these endurance tests, the fifth and sixth prototypes received their ultimate armament: formidable 122mm cannons. Prototype number 5 was equipped with the S-34 gun, while prototype number 6 received the renowned D-25T, a weapon that had already proven its devastating effectiveness on the production model IS-2 tanks. Both colossal machines were then dispatched once more to the Kubinka proving ground, destined for the ultimate test of fire, ready to face the relentless barrage that would determine their fate and perhaps the future of the battlefield. Even with occasional turbocharger malfunctions, one of which catastrophically led to engine failure during critical trials, the Factory Commission and state acceptance representatives largely lauded the new tank. Members of the testing committee specifically highlighted the machine's exceptional protection, formidable armament, impressive maneuverability, and even a surprising degree of reliability, a rare feat for a prototype. Their conclusion was unequivocal. Object 701 stood ready for adoption by the Red Army. Yet Vyacheslav Malyshev, the People's Commissar of the tank industry, held a profoundly different view. He declared that the machine had not undergone sufficient testing, and that launching a new heavy tank into production would inevitably lead to a drastic reduction in the overall output of armored vehicles. Malyshev argued that the conducted tests failed to meet established standards, and that the Chelyabinsk plant was physically incapable of simultaneously producing Object 701, the formidable IS-2 tanks, and heavy self-propelled artillery units. Furthermore, the Commissar believed that the IS-3 tank, also under development in Chelyabinsk, was better suited for mass production. Its simpler design, he contended, offered comparable armor protection without the complexities of Object 701. This was a direct challenge, not merely to a design, but to the very industrial capacity and strategic vision of the nation's wartime machine. The leadership and engineers at the Chelyabinsk plant vehemently disagreed with the Commissar's stance. They were convinced that Object 701 surpassed the IS-3 across a multitude of parameters, particularly in crew ergonomics and the critical ease of field repair. A fierce conflict erupted, pitting the industrialists and military on one side against the commissariat on the other. The dispute escalated to such an intensity that its resolution demanded the direct intervention of the country's highest leadership. In March of 1945, the warring factions finally reached a fragile compromise. Object 701 would undergo a second round of trials, this time under even more rigorous conditions. Crucially, the Chelyabinsk plant received permission to begin preparing its production lines for the new tank. The machine's fate remained far from sealed, but a tangible opportunity for its integration into the armed forces had at last materialized. The new cycle of tests for the sixth prototype commenced in April and spanned several arduous weeks. Upon the completion of all evaluations, the Commission concluded that, despite a few minor observations, the tank's mechanical components possessed sufficient reliability for operational deployment. By the end of July, Object 701 was once again recommended for adoption. But Malyshev, with unwavering resolve, continued to oppose the decision. The Commissar maintained that the production of heavy tanks was already fraught with significant difficulties, and adding yet another model would only exacerbate an already precarious situation. By this point, the war in Europe had drawn to a close. Factories across the nation were gradually scaling back their wartime production, casting a long shadow of uncertainty over the future of Project Object 701. Throughout the entirety of 1945, the colossal machine teetered precariously, balancing between full military adoption and the complete termination of its ambitious program. Its very existence hung in the balance, a testament to the complex interplay of engineering brilliance, political will, and the shifting tides of a world emerging from total war. For Object 701, the path was riddled with doubt. The formidable IS-3 tank, an industrial behemoth, already consumed the entire production capacity of the Chelyabinsk-Kirov plant. In the eyes of many influential officials, the very existence of the IS-3 rendered Object 701 not merely superfluous, but an outright redundancy. Its future, a vision of advanced armor and firepower, hung precariously in the balance, a concept waiting in the shadows of an already established titan. The tide began to turn, subtly at first, then with an undeniable force in the early days of 1946. Reports from the field, initially whispers, then a chorus of complaints, detailed grave systemic issues plaguing the IS-3. This was the very tank championed so vigorously by People's Commissar Vyacheslav Malyshev, a machine once hailed as the pinnacle of Soviet engineering. Yet, under the unforgiving crucible of military deployment, it revealed itself to be a raw, unreliable beast. Deep-seated design flaws demanded immediate, drastic rectification. Many of these imposing vehicles, fresh from the factory floor, succumbed to catastrophic failures after only a handful of kilometers, grinding to a halt, their promise of invincibility shattered. The crisis was undeniable, a stark challenge to the Soviet Union's industrial might. A bold proposition emerged from the growing disquiet. Replace the problematic IS-3 production with the nascent Object 701. The main Armored Directorate, recognizing the gravity of the situation and the potential of the new design, threw its considerable weight behind this audacious idea in April. Yet, the bureaucratic machinery of the state moved with characteristic friction. The Ministry of Transport Machine Building initially resisted, wary of the immense logistical and financial undertaking of such a fundamental shift in production. But the urgency of the situation, the undeniable failures of the IS-3, ultimately swayed the balance. On the 29th of April, 1946, a pivotal moment arrived. The sixth prototype of Object 701, a testament to years of relentless design and refinement, was officially adopted into the Red Army, bestowed with its formidable new designation, the IS-4. The order to cease production of the B workshops of the Chelyabinsk-Kirov plant, a crucible of wartime production, were retooled and humming with the mass assembly of these new, heavy machines. The plan was nothing short of ambitious. A staggering 1,505 IS-4 tanks were slated for completion before the year's end, with a projected production tempo of 6 machines per day. Blueprints to full-scale serial production had finally culminated in triumph. But this apparent victory was merely the end of one chapter and the beginning of a far more brutal test. The true trials for the IS-4 were only just beginning. The launch of the IS-4's serial production coincided with an unforeseen and crippling human crisis within Soviet industry. The echoes of the Second World War had faded, and with peace came a profound shift in the nation's workforce. A vast exodus of talented engineers and skilled laborers, the very backbone of the defense sector, departed their wartime posts. They sought new lives, new opportunities, drawn by the promise of rebuilding and contributing to the burgeoning civilian economy. The Chelyabinsk-Kirov plant, once a bastion of expertise, found itself stripped of a significant portion of its most experienced specialists. The consequences were immediate, stark, and devastatingly clear in the quality of the tanks now rolling off the assembly lines. These new machines, born of ambition and urgency, carried within them dozens of hidden defects. They were ghosts in the metal, invisible until the immense pressures of combat readiness or rigorous testing forced them into the light. From May through November of 1946, the plant, despite its grand plans, managed to assemble a mere 6 IS-4 tanks. Not a single one of these machines was deemed fit for service. The Military Acceptance Commission, a relentless arbiter of quality, rejected tank after tank, each inspection uncovering fresh flaws in both design and assembly. The dream of a new, powerful, heavy tank was quickly devolving into a nightmare of systemic failure. By October, the scale of the crisis was undeniable. Specialists had meticulously compiled a list of nearly 1,400 essential modifications. Adding to this staggering burden, officials presented approximately 500 additional requirements for the tank. The sheer magnitude of the necessary rework was so immense that, in practical terms, it amounted to redesigning the tank almost from its very foundations. The IS-4, barely born, faced a complete rebirth. In April of 1947, 2 IS-4 tanks from the late production batch of the previous year were finally dispatched for renewed polygon trials. These grueling tests stretched on for 2 months, concluding in June. The results were profoundly disheartening. Mechanics meticulously documented a litany of failures. Numerous breakdowns in the chassis, critical malfunctions within the transmission assemblies, and persistent, debilitating problems with the electrical systems. The experts, in their final assessment, delivered a crushing verdict. The machine's engine was fundamentally underpowered for a tank of such immense mass. To the growing list of imperfections, the promise of the IS-4, once a beacon of Soviet might, now seemed to flicker, besieged by the very challenges it was designed to overcome. The world inside the IS-4 was a realm of profound limitation. With its hatches sealed, the crew's visibility from the combat compartment became utterly inadequate, a dangerous blindness in the chaos of battle. Yet, even as these critical ergonomic flaws were being noted, other trials were underway. Parallel to the grueling running tests, a series of ballistic evaluations commenced, stretching across the spring months, from March through May. It was within these trials that the IS-4 was poised to reveal its primary, indeed, perhaps its only, undisputed virtue. The tank's frontal armor, a marvel of Soviet engineering, confidently absorbed the brutal impact of German armor-piercing shells. These were no ordinary projectiles. Fired from the most formidable anti-tank weapons produced by German industry, these 128mm rounds screamed towards their targets at 800 meters per second. Yet against the IS-4, they shattered, deflected, or simply failed to penetrate. No other Soviet tank could lay claim to such an impenetrable defense against the enemy's most devastating munitions. This was its moment of triumph, a testament to raw, unyielding protection. But the triumph was fleeting. In the crucible of the summer months that same year, designers frantically introduced a cascade of modifications. So extensive were these changes that, to the military's eye, a virtually new tank emerged, bearing only a superficial resemblance to the model accepted into service just a year prior. It was an admission of fundamental design flaws, a desperate attempt to salvage a promising concept. These countless refinements, however, proved insufficient. They failed to fundamentally resolve the tank's crippling reliability issues. The agonizing cycle of testing and redesign dragged on, yielding a tragically small number of operational vehicles for the armed forces throughout 1947. Of the 200 tanks originally slated for delivery, the Army received a mere 52. Only 46 of these were fresh from the production lines that year. The remaining 6 were merely reworked, ill-fated prototypes from the troubled 1946 batch. A stark failure. By January of 1948, the Red Army had seen enough. They completely halted acceptance of the IS-4. The cause was a fresh wave of newly discovered defects within the transmission system, rendering the tanks dangerously unsafe for their crews. Operating these machines risked not just mechanical failure, but the very lives of those inside. Representatives from the Cleatvina factory, desperate to salvage their project, offered assurances. The problem, they promised, would be rectified swiftly. True to their word, or perhaps their desperation, deliveries resumed just 1 month later. The constant, almost frantic tinkering continued. In March, a new TP-47 intercom system was introduced. May saw adjustments to the road wheels. By August, an automatic fuel drainage system had been added. Each minor improvement seemed to mask a deeper, unresolved crisis. In the spring or early summer of 1948, the Main Armored Directorate launched a comprehensive, large-scale test. 7 serial production IS-4s were put through their paces, a final definitive examination of their combat readiness. The results were nothing short of catastrophic. Every single vehicle subjected to the trials failed. Engines seized, gearboxes disintegrated, transmissions locked up. The mechanical heart of each tank simply gave out. Beyond these critical mechanical breakdowns, the Commission meticulously documented a litany of other failures. Radio stations proved consistently unreliable, their signals fading into static. The hull's poor sealing allowed dust to infiltrate the combat compartment, choking the crew and impairing equipment. Ventilation, already inadequate, plummeted during intense firing, severely diminishing the crew's combat effectiveness. Imagine the suffocating heat, the dust-choked air, the constant fear of mechanical failure. That August, the Army once again refused to accept any more tanks. The now deeply skeptical would test up to half of all vehicles from each incoming batch before officially commissioning them into service. It was an unprecedented measure, a testament to the deep-seated distrust. The efficacy of this new protocol was immediately apparent. During one such rigorous inspection in December of that same year, an astonishing 18 out of 24 IS-4s broke down, victims of engine or transmission failure. 3 out of every 4 tanks proved incapable of completing even a basic test run without suffering catastrophic mechanical failure. The dream of the impenetrable tank had become a nightmare of unreliability, a monument to ambition undone by insurmountable flaws. The exact count of these formidable machines remains shrouded in a slight historical fog. Some records suggest around 224 tanks rolled off the line, while other, equally meticulous sources push that figure to 233 units. This subtle divergence speaks volumes, often attributed to the complex realities of wartime manufacturing and the bureaucratic intricacies of double counting. Was it a Renex from 1946, only officially inducted into service in 1947, creating this statistical ripple, a ghost in the machine of accounting? But beneath the numbers, a far more troubling narrative began to unfold. Random quality checks, conducted with increasing urgency along the production lines of the Chelyabinsk plant, unearthed a stark and dangerous truth. Many critical components, the very sinews of these war machines, were being fabricated with gross violations of technological standards. This was not merely about aesthetic flaws. It was about structural integrity, about the life-or-death reliability of a tank destined for the front lines, a silent betrayal built into its very core. On the first day of January 1949, the Army delivered its most damning verdict yet. For the third time, they halted acceptance of the IS-4. The message was clear, resounding through the halls of power. This formidable, heavily armored Titan, hailed as the Soviet Union's most protected heavy tank, was failing its most basic mandate. Its very existence now hung by a thread, its fate to be decided at the highest echelons, within the hallowed, often volatile chambers of the Council of Ministers. That February, 1949, the Council of Ministers convened. The air was thick with tension. The discussions reportedly stormy, as the nation's top leadership grappled with the problematic heavy tank. A compromise, born from necessity and political will, emerged from the heated debates. The Chelyabinsk plant received a directive: complete the assembly of a final batch of 12 machines by May of that year. After that, all focus, all resources, would be redirected. The production of new IS-4 tanks would effectively cease. Instead, every available hand, every engineering mind, would be thrown into the monumental task of rectifying the defects in the tanks already delivered, bringing the existing fleet to an acceptable standard of reliability. It was a desperate gamble, an admission of deep-seated issues. By September of that same year, 10 newly assembled tanks were handed over for renewed field trials. The hopes, though tempered, were still present. The results, once again, proved profoundly disheartening. Only half of these machines managed to complete the rigorous tests without critical breakdowns. During their runs, a single engine failed, 2 transmissions fractured, 6 road wheels demanded replacement, and a single suspension torsion bar succumbed. Yet the true shock awaited the mechanics back at the factory. As they began repairs, they discovered an alarming degree of wear, utterly disproportionate to the actual mileage. It was as if the very metal itself was aging prematurely, its molecular structure betraying its intended lifespan. Components and assemblies were disintegrating at a rate far exceeding their projected operational life, a ghost in the machine. Undeterred, the engineers pressed on, a relentless pursuit of solutions to the mounting catalog of problems. Utilizing existing stockpiles of components, the factory assembled another 25 tanks, meticulously incorporating every military observation, every painful lesson learned. These machines, a testament to stubborn persistence, received the designation IS-4M, the M signifying a modernized variant. This wasn't just about new builds. Throughout 1950 and 1951, 217 previously manufactured tanks underwent extensive retrofitting to meet this enhanced standard. The modernization was comprehensive: reinforced transmission components, a re-engineered engine cooling system, and significant improvements to the hull's sealing, a desperate bid to finally tame the beast. By December of 1951, the monumental task of producing and re-equipping the IS-4 finally concluded. The total count of these formidable, if flawed, heavy tanks, including all modernized variants, ultimately reached approximately 251. Interestingly, the very first operational units to receive the IS-4, as early as 1947, were not frontline combat formations, but rather the Chelyabinsk Tank Technical School and the 30th Training Tank Regiment. Their mission: to meticulously train the crews, to painstakingly develop the tactics for deploying these new, heavy machines. A tank designed for the crucible of battle, yet spending its formative years in the quiet, often frustrating, proving grounds of education. It was here, away from the direct gaze of combat, that the true legacy of the IS-4 began to solidify. A testament not just to its formidable armor, but to the relentless, often painful struggle for perfection in the unforgiving world of military engineering. The 5th Guards Mechanized Army, an elite formation of the Soviet armed forces, was destined to be the first combat unit fully equipped with the new IS-4 heavy tank. Yet, despite its prestigious assignment, chronic production delays and persistent mechanical failures plagued its integration. It was not until the closing days of January 1949 that even a single subdivision could be fully outfitted. This newly formed unit, armed with the formidable IS-4, was immediately thrown into large-scale military exercises. The objective: to rigorously assess the combat capabilities of the modernized IS-4 against the cutting-edge T-54 medium tank. What unfolded on the training grounds was a stark, unforgiving revelation of the heavy machine's numerous shortcomings. The IS-4 proved too immense, its staggering weight rendering it impassable for the vast majority of bridges. Its mobility across rugged terrain was, to put it mildly, deeply unsatisfactory. And its reliability, a critical metric for any combat vehicle, remained utterly indefensible. Commanders meticulously documented a litany of technical malfunctions throughout the maneuvers, ultimately concluding that the IS-4 simply did not meet the contemporary requirements for a heavy tank. By 1949, a new contender was already on the horizon, the T-10 heavy tank, designed to rectify the many deficiencies of its predecessor. The plan was clear. The 5th Guards Mechanized Army would be the first to receive these advanced machines, while the existing IS-4s would be relegated to newly formed heavy tank regiments. However, the implementation of this strategic shift was severely hampered by a critical scarcity of operational tanks. Approximately 80 machines were perpetually sidelined, languishing in factories, awaiting repairs. Ultimately, only 2 regiments could be fully formed and armed with the IS-4. By 1954, these units underwent a significant reorganization, transforming into mixed heavy tank regiments. These new formations incorporated a diverse array of vehicles, including the IS-4, alongside the IS-2 and IS-3 tanks. This pragmatic decision was driven by a dual necessity: a shortage of each individual tank type, and a deliberate attempt to compensate for the weaknesses of certain tanks with the strengths of others. The IS-4's service within these composite units continued for several more years, but the intensity of its operational deployment undeniably dwindled. The machines increasingly languished in their parks, emerging onto the firing ranges only for infrequent training exercises. By 1960, every remaining operational IS-4 underwent a comprehensive overhaul Legic Reserve. It seemed then that the inglorious saga of this ill-fated tank had reached its anticlimactic conclusion. Machines, into which colossal resources and years of strenuous labor had been poured, now rusted in storage depots, devoid of any hope of ever entering a true battle. Yet fate had one final unexpected twist in store for the IS-4, a turn that would ultimately determine its definitive destiny. As the 1960s drew to a close, relations between the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China spiraled into a precipitous decline. Two socialist behemoths, who had only recently hailed each other as fraternal allies, now teetered on the brink of armed confrontation. Ideological schisms had metastasized into volatile territorial disputes. The vast, desolate stretches of their shared border became a powder keg. The air along the vast, desolate border grew thick with unspoken threats. Diplomatic notes, once the language of international discourse, had given way to the ominous rumble of military preparations, echoing a profound shift in the geopolitical landscape. Across the expansive frontier, claims hardened into an undeniable reality. On one side, the Chinese command established a formidable exclusion zone, stretching for 200 kilometers, a stark, forbidding barrier. Behind this newly drawn line, forces began to converge, a silent but undeniable declaration of intent. The sheer scale of this deployment sent a clear, chilling message across the barren plains and rugged mountains. The Soviet command responded with a rapid, urgent fortification of its own border lines, a desperate scramble to secure vulnerable flanks. Additional military contingents were swiftly deployed across the immense stretches of the Far East and Central Asia, transforming peaceful garrisons into bustling hubs of readiness. Every move was a counter-move, a grim dance on the precipice of conflict. Equipping these newly fortified regions demanded an astronomical quantity of firepower. Building permanent, reinforced concrete bunkers along the entire sprawling length of the border would have been an undertaking of impossible duration and prohibitive expense. Time was a luxury no one possessed, and resources, while vast, were not infinite. The challenge was immense, the solution elusive. Then, military engineers proposed an unconventional, almost audacious solution. Their idea? To repurpose decommissioned tanks, transforming these symbols of offensive power into static, immovable firing points. The logic was compelling. The powerful armor and formidable weaponry of these aging machines, particularly the heavy IS-4 tanks, were perfectly suited for such a role. Their cost, when viewed as fortified structures, was incomparably lower than constructing entirely new, purpose-built defenses. And so, the IS-4, once relegated to the silent dormancy of storage depots, found a second life. Though to call it an honorable one would be a profound overstatement. These behemoths, originally conceived for lightning-fast breakthroughs and sweeping, maneuverable battles, were now condemned to a grim, perpetual stillness. Their very essence, their design for dynamism, was stripped away, replaced by an enforced, unyielding immobility. The process was brutal, efficient. They were hauled from their storage bases, driven to their designated deployment sites, and then meticulously buried in pre-prepared excavations. Only the turret, with its menacing 122mm cannon, remained above the earth, a silent sentinel. This formidable weapon was capable of engaging enemy armored vehicles at significant distances, while the turret's thick, cast armor offered its crew reliable protection from return fire, a steel cocoon in a world of uncertainty. Some machines faced an even more radical transformation. Their turrets were entirely removed from the chassis and then integrated into specially constructed concrete structures, complete with subterranean bunkers. These complexes were not mere firing points. They were miniature fortresses, self-contained bastions of defense. Beneath the surface, sprawling chambers housed personnel, vast ammunition depots, and ample food supplies, allowing the garrison to sustain an autonomous defense for extended periods, isolated from the world above. A tank turret, seamlessly merged with a concrete casemate, became a powerful artillery installation, boasting a virtually unlimited ammunition supply and capable of round-the-clock vigilance. Other defensive positions were conceived with significantly less complexity, born of sheer necessity. An IS-4 would simply be driven into a pre-dug pit, then surrounded and covered with earth up to its turret, camouflaged to blend seamlessly into the surrounding terrain. Inside these buried giants, a small crew could maintain a combat vigil for days, even weeks, enduring the claustrophobic confines, ready at any moment to unleash devastating fire upon an approaching adversary. The absence of any need for movement liberated the IS-4 from its most notorious weaknesses, its notoriously unreliable transmission, and its capricious, high-maintenance engine. In its new stationary role, the tank could finally unleash its full potential, a raw power now focused and unwavering. Yet, it was a destiny far removed from the grand visions of its original creators, a testament to the brutal pragmatism of war. These fortified lines, a network of buried steel and concrete, stretched across the entire length of the Soviet-Chinese border, a silent, unblinking deterrent. The IS-4 was not alone in this grim repurposing. Other outdated armored vehicles also found their final resting places beneath the earth, transformed from instruments of war into the very ground of defense, a stark illustration of how ingenuity, born from the crucible of conflict, can redefine purpose and reshape destiny. Deep within the earth, along a vast and volatile frontier, stood an iron sentinel. Not merely another type of tank, these machines, with their unparalleled armor protection, were considered the most vital components of an elaborate defensive system. An impenetrable shell, 250 millimeters of cast armor on the turret alone, rendered these formidable strongpoints virtually impervious to the most potent field artillery and enemy tank guns. A crew could engage in combat even under intense bombardment, secure in the knowledge their hidden fortress would not yield. They were the silent guardians, designed to withstand the unimaginable, to anchor a defense against a looming war that threatened to engulf two communist giants. The air crackled with hostility. Border skirmishes escalated, culminating in the brutal clashes over Damansky Island in March of 1969. For weeks, the world watched, teetering on the precipice of a full-scale conflict. Yet the unthinkable never came to pass. Both superpowers recoiled from the abyss. Diplomats returned to the negotiating table, and the searing tension slowly began to recede. Though deep-seated mistrust persisted for decades, the fortified zones along the border continued their silent vigil, their ultimate purpose diminishing with each passing year. By the 1980s, a fragile thaw had begun to soften the geopolitical ice. One by one, these formidable tank firing points were deactivated, stripped of their deadly intent. Their mighty cannons were disarmed, ammunition convoys departed, and the crews, once poised for Armageddon, were reassigned. Only the hulking steel carcasses remained, half-buried monuments to a war that never ignited. 1997 marked the definitive end. Russia and China signed an agreement to demilitarize their shared border, sealing the fate of these silent sentinels. Today, in the remote, windswept expanses of the Russian Far East and Kazakhstan, their skeletal remains can still be found. Earthbound leviathans, half swallowed by the soil, ravaged by rust, slowly merging with the desolate landscape. The Soviet Union's most heavily armored tank, conceived as an unyielding bulwark in a war that never materialized, completed its journey from an ambitious wartime project to a forgotten relic of the Cold War, never once firing a shot in true anger.